Hey, welcome everyone. This is the Embodied Dialogue podcast, and I'm Seth Dellinger, and I'm here today with Kyle Koch. And I'm very excited to meet Kyle and get to know him a little better. He reached out to me recently, and I was just thinking if I spoke really generally, like really generally, I'd say we're both in the world of movement. We both work with movement, but we do that quite differently. Um, but another connection we have is that we've both been in conversation with the cognitive scientist and psychologist from the University of Toronto, John Vervaeke, who many people may already know this, but he has probably his best known thing is that he put together a lecture series called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And if I just say, in terms of my own work, and maybe you relate to this, Kyle, he's just really foregrounded this idea of wisdom. Like there's something called wisdom. It's something like knowing how to live a good life. Um, and that for me and the work I do around movement has really kind of helped me put a frame around how I do it. Um, but Kyle, you're part of the Evolve Move Play project with Rafe Kelly, and I know you have other projects. So maybe if you want to just kind of give your own introduction to people listening about what you do, and then yeah, we'll just get into it.
Awesome. Thanks, Seth. Yeah, I'm super stoked to chat with you. I listened to your podcast with John, and that's what inspired me to reach out. I'm unfortunately on a busy road, so we'll see how that goes. Um,
And where are
yeah,
you
and
exactly, by the way?
I'm on Salt Spring Island in British Columbia.
Okay, and I'm in
So I'm
Washington
on,
D.C.
okay, nice.
To ground ourselves on the planet somewhere.
I slept in the beautiful forest last night on the edge of the ocean, and I excitedly woke up and wanted to make sure I at least had Wi-Fi for this call, if not a beautiful background. Um, but yeah, I think very similar. John gave me and us at Evolve Move Play, he gave us language and a philosophical framework for what we were noticing. The phenomenological experiences that I was having. I'm like, we're doing this thing and we don't know how we're doing it. Like it's not what we started out intending to do, but yet this thing is happening. People are having transformative, deep, profound, insightful experiences time and time again. I don't want to say like on accident, like we are creating a cultural container for connection, and connection leads to that. But John brought in this like framework, this system that we could more reliably cultivate these insights, more reliably and smoothly, I think is the important part, move through transition and cultivate better versions of ourselves.
Now, can I just jump in, just thinking of people watching? Because when you say evolve, move, play, I already have a bunch of images in my head, even though I haven't been there. But essentially, you receive city folk like me, right? And you take them into the wilderness. And I know there's different programs, maybe some are longer or shorter, but you're bringing people into nature and doing movement and doing connection in nature. Is that right? Do you want to just give a little more, like zoomed out view of what is involve, move, play, and then just continue? I didn't want to break your chain of thought too much, but just thinking of people listening so they really get it.
Yeah, Evolve Move Play is an ecology of practices aimed at cultivating a more meaningful life, doing that through the lens of movement and play. And I really like recently Rafe has been it's a set of physical practices embedded in nature aimed at falling more in love with being. And we do a lot of different things, and what it looks like we do is not at all what we do, and it's very confusing from like a visual standpoint, from a marketing standpoint. It's the hardest thing to do, but when people come they feel it. It's like, how do you describe a psychedelic experience?
Mm.
So that's what we do.
Psychedelics that it evolved. Like,
Exactly.
yeah. Oh, it's I and you recently had a conversation with John Vervaeke where you were describing some of this, and just in terms of and this is a phrase he'll often use, like converging lines, like people doing different things in different places, kind of coming to the same place. So we might both be influenced by John in this sense, but in the program that I run, which is online, but it's a program that combines embodiment work and meditation and also relational practices. Um, and I have something I call, or I guess a concept of anytime, anywhere awareness, so that I can practice, of course, when I have 30 minutes, sit on my meditation cushion, but I can also have a form of practice at the store or driving or just walking from my car to some appointment. I can tune in those ways. But one of the things that I've come to is talking about falling in love with life. So you were talking about falling in love with being. And I wonder if that gets already at a little bit of the part you say that you can't just see it when you watch people doing the things they do at Evolve Move Play, but maybe on the inside it's something like that. Is that is that like a connection between the inside and outside?
Yeah, I think I think similar to, the work that you do, at least in what I was reading, is bringing people to the awareness of what is happening,
Hmm.
right? And so yeah, we bring a lot of John's dialogical practices. We play a game,
Hmm.
and there's the outer game, and that's the obvious set of like constraints and rules. And the goal is not at all to win the game. Nobody cares if you win the game. We're not gonna like praise you or give you trophies or do anything. But really, the deeper point is, what did you notice about yourself in the playing of the game? And it could be from a physical standpoint. I noticed my hips are tighter. I noticed I didn't have the mobility or the range of motion that I would like. But you can also go deeper. Like I noticed I didn't want to hurt my partner. Or I noticed I really wanted to win. Or I noticed I didn't really agree with how my partner was playing. And it's that kind of noticing that typically goes unnoticed.
Hmm.
Like it comes up and people don't think of that as actually important.
Hmm.
And so we pause throughout these games and we're like, let's stop here. Like, what did you notice? Okay, let's talk about it. Let's bring that to the forefront. Like, let's bring that into the reality. And then that's a reflection of our character, right? Now we can start to look at virtuosity, ways of being, like in your work, like pattern recognition. Like, wow, like I always I'm always like um I just ran a workshop this weekend on the island that I'm on, and the common theme is people are so loving and caring that they don't actually give their partner an appropriate stimulus.
Hmm.
Like, oh, I didn't want to hurt them. And I'm like, well, you're hurting them by not wanting to hurt them. You're training them on bad patterns. You're
Hmm.
not giving them enough input for them to work with.
Hmm.
And it's not a bad thing. Like I would rather people err on the side of love and compassion than like being like way too rough and violent. But yeah, and that was really surprising for people.
Hmm. So what that makes me think of is a couple of things, and I'm going back in my mind to also hearing Rafe talk about the work, Rafe Kelly, who created Evolve Move Play. But so one of the things that he talks about that a lot of us are missing or have had very little of, even in childhood, is rough and tumble play. And it sounds like that's a little of what's going on at your workshop. You're trying to create a situation where it's like, hey, you're going to actually use your physical bodies to like move each other. And the thing is, of course, someone who's had a lot of chance for rough and tumble play might not confuse like me pushing you with necessarily uh, being in conflict with you. I might already know that like I can use all of the weight of my body against all of the weight of your body, but if we're coming from the right intention, I mean, we could even try to win. You're trying to pin me down, I'm trying to pin you down, but we know that we're not going to finish each other off at the end. Like we just know that. Um, but on the flip side, like so, you were talking with John Vervaeke more recently, and I believe you guys spent a fair amount of time on the loneliness epidemic. Um, but it just strikes me that if I go to evolve, move, play, I could have this concept in my head. Well, I'm going into nature and I'm going to do movement and fresh air, and that's all good for me. But it's also like I'm coming into much closer contact with all the other people at that workshop than what I typically do because, my sort of day to day tends to be like in front of my computer. I order stuff on Amazon. I go to the store and I use the automated checkout. I have certain friends, that I plan things with and see, but it's like always at an appointed time. And like I look just right before I go there and all of these things. Um, and it's funny that like I could get to the point of maybe if I'm one of the people at your workshop and I'm looking at another person who, you know, is someone new to me and I'm saying, well, I don't want to have too much contact because then I might be in danger of hurting them. Right. It just seems like by the time I get to that place, my concept of contact and hurting the other, it just seems like there's a lot of almost I guess confusion there.
Yeah, and that's why we have this longer progressive approach. Um, I was actually at the end of this workshop that I taught, we started to lean into a contact improv lens. And one of the participants was like a well-seasoned contact improv practitioner. And he said that the way we entered into that frame was the most organic, connective experience that he's ever seen done. And it's because we're building attunement and sensitivity and trust the whole time so that as we arrive at that place, so we don't start with wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the first thing that we do.
Right.
It's often the last thing that we do. And even getting into the dance component, if you've ever been to an ecstatic dance, which I know you have, and I listened to your episode, it's really intimidating for people, even though the container is set, there's clear agreements, there's rules, but there's still this, and especially in a nonverbal context, not knowing how to navigate that. So we give people really easy, clear, and that's why games are accessible for everybody
Mm-hmm.
because thinking, you're not thinking how to do it right. And I was reading through some of your stuff and I've heard people mention that about you is like Seth he gives us explorations, versus, okay, I want you to move, your leg, as fast as you can over your head or across your back. It's like, well, did I do it fast enough? Okay, what part of my leg am I moving? People get so caught up in the details of wanting to do something right.
Yeah.
And so I find that techniques and specific language is so limiting.
Mm-hmm.
But by offering frames, so games are frames, but then you create a frame inside of a game, and then you make it fun and less threatening, and now these people are building rapport.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, like I'm kind of interacting with you, but I'm really not. I can also not interact with you. And that sense of trust that builds, then we're like, okay, next game. And then we slowly progress. And even in contact improv, it's like, okay, like we're going to start at the aura. We're just going to imagine the negative space around a person and move in that space. And then, okay, now let's enter into the skin level.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. and then we're gonna enter into the bone and or the muscle and pushing and pulling, and then we're gonna enter into the bone and we're gonna lift and move, and by the time people are there, they feel trust and they don't have these like they don't have performance preconceptions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, the other thing I hear in what you describe, you said earlier something like, I forget your exact phrase, but you talked about how you'll just pause people every once in a while and say, "What are you noticing?" Right? And essentially, they're pausing and noticing things that they don't normally notice, or maybe things that they do notice but they don't normally pause to consider would be another way of putting it. But when I think of, so I also think in terms of an ecology of practices, doing various different kinds of practices. But one of the things that kind of weaves all the different practices together, from meditation to a relational practice, or something like what you're describing, is that sense of bringing us into contact with that thing which, generally speaking, we don't have so much contact with. It's just, you know my attention gets lit up because, like just talking to you, we've never talked before, so there's a feeling in this conversation that wouldn't be there if we'd talked 100 times before. um, so there's something about like waking people's attention up. And I think this is, again, I just kind of want to repeat something I said. It's like that's the piece of embodiment work, if we sort of zoom out in a general way, because I imagine we share this view that when John tells people that embodiment is part of wisdom practice, I feel like a lot of people nod their head, but then they go back to the books, and it's like, no, you have to
Exactly.
actually, as you were saying to him, go outside and do this stuff. But specifically, apart from like extolling all the virtues of physical health and being able to move capably and all of that, it's like in our culture, there's just this whole realm of, we could say, cognitive, emotional, all this experience that only happens in the context of movement. So even if I'm playing with you and I kind of want to win, but I don't want to hurt you, and then there's some kind of weird conflict, like that's not a conflict that comes up in the same way unless my body is engaging with your body. So it it like brings things to the forefront, in a way that just just reading, just conversing, just pondering doesn't do.
Yeah, it's so interesting how easy it is to avoid that. You know, it reminds me of Ian McGilchrist's work that we are living so much in the left side of the brain that these things go unnoticed because we're moving through the world thinking forward or backwards. Oh, these are all the things that happened. Oh no, I did that. That was wrong. And then there's all the things I have to do, my schedules, my meetings, da 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 da. And when we're in embodied moment where that is when we're in the body, fully inhabited, listening and noticing and one of the teachings that I went to the Wilderness Awareness School, and through the lineage of that, there was a teacher named Grandfather through the Tom Brown lineage, and he really talked about how when he was living in nature, they're living in the right side of the brain. I mean, he doesn't use that language, but the way he describes the sacred silence is because you're taking in and noticing. Oh, I'm noticing a tension in my body, and maybe a cougar's watching you, or maybe I was when I was living in the woods, I could sense the barometric pressure change, and I could predict rain. It was a felt sense that I could only have in my body. I could watch the weather and I could logic it out and I could think and I could have it, but I could feel it in my body, and it only lasted a moment.
Mm-hmm.
There was a moment where the pressure shifted. And if I didn't catch it, I wouldn't know because I would be in the new present moment of the new pressure. And I think people don't recognize that with their emotions. And I think that's when we become embodied more so we can start to recognize those emotional triggers where you're happy, you're regulated, something happens, and now you're triggered. And it was a moment that if you didn't catch it, you wouldn't my teacher calls, there's this idea of baseline. What is the baseline of your environment? In a city, the baseline is high, it's intense. And
Mhm.
if you're out of baseline, lower than it, you stand out. And he often asks me to notice when the baseline changes and that becomes the new baseline in which to perceive from. And I think in that embodiment, when we become aware of our baseline, we can sense that moment that it shifts and we enter into a new baseline. And this is kind of a new thought from me, but I'm feeling the profoundness of that of, oh, I'm now upset or happy or whatever it is. And the final thing I'll say, kind of on that, there's two ways to look at it. A lot of these things are framed in the negative. Okay, it's good to recognize when you're triggered so you can regulate. It's recognized when you're upset so you can regulate. I'm like, okay, good skill, easy skill, easier of the two skills. Other skill, can you recognize joy and deep happiness? To, often I did an exercise where for 30 days I wrote down every time I experienced deep happiness and joy.
Mhm.
And it was life changing. Things I didn't. I was playing with children, being around these people. All these little moments started to stand out to me, and that profoundly shifted my orientation in life. I didn't even realize that what was bringing me joy.
Mhm.
So I just want to make sure people also hear that is, to recognize that shift. I'm sad or I'm neutral and something happened and now I'm full of joy. And oh, that's pointing also at something. And I don't know, what would you call that? It's not a, it's, if you're dysregulated and you're trying to regulate, what would you call that other side of that? I don't know.
Side of joy.
Yeah, if you're, let's say you're neutral, but then you go into a place of joy, you wouldn't try to regulate that, or you wouldn't call it dysregulated. You would almost maybe try to maintain it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that what we can do is like it brings to mind the Buddhist practice around Vedanas in meditation. Vedanas just being there's three. It's either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. But what they point to is if I'm, let's say I'm in the pleasant, so, I'm experiencing joy, but I'm maybe not naming it the way you did and really recognizing it for what it is and appreciating it. It's just more like, oh, this is awesome. Like all my friends are here. This is a really good song playing. Like, I just wish this would go on forever. This is how it should be. And so there's a kind of a clinging there. Like I am enjoying myself, but I'm already creating suffering in the sense of like wanting life to always be like this, and it just constricts a little. um and in the flip side, I mean, this particular practice has been really deep for me. Like, so when you talked about being triggered or something like that, uh let's say, I just got some bad news. It's not good news. I can't make it into good news. I can't make myself feel good, but I can notice the not wanting to feel this. Or I can just understand I just got some bad news. It's not going to feel good, but what does it feel like? And just feel it, right? And that's more likely to There's a couple words you use that actually I wanted to highlight. So one is emotion, and the other one is orientation. I don't know if you saw one of the people who's also been in conversation with John Vervaeke is a woman named Vivian Dittmar, who's German, and she's really focused on emotions quite a bit. And I was kind of laughing to myself because when you talked about writing down, every time you experience joy, she says this. I mean, I think she talks about joy, but I remember also talking about like anger. But she says, notice that when you drop the fork on the ground, there might be anger, right? Because for just a moment, it's like that goddamn fork isn't supposed to be on the ground. It wasn't supposed to slip out of my hand. But then it's like you don't start breaking stuff. You just take action to solve the problem. You pick the fork up and like now you're not angry anymore. Right. But that's in the sense of orientation. She describes each of the emotions as a kind of she says it's a feeling that then becomes constellated through a mental interpretation. So when I drop the fork, I look at the fork on the ground and I say to myself, that's wrong. And so anger is to do something to put it right. Now, of course, if I did lose my temper and start throwing things, that would be like a shadow version of anger where, it just turns into destructiveness. But even like this thing about I don't want to hurt my partner, it seems like it's a little bit of a question of do I know how to modulate these energies that I'm feeling in my body? And of course, we can sit here on the podcast and talk about it. But if I'm at a Evolve Move Play and my partner's coming at me, it's totally a visceral thing. And so one other thing you mentioned a baseline and the difference between being in the city and being in nature, but also if someone is, we use that term triggered, like what's the basic thing that they always say to someone? Feel your body, feel your feet on the ground, notice that you're breathing. And the thing about it is like in terms of knowing something, it's like the fact that I have a body and that I can feel the weight of my body where I'm sitting. It just seems like the most ridiculously obvious things. So why would I give that any attention, right? But what we notice again and again is I've failed to notice that I'm in a body. I've failed to notice the weight of my body on the chair. I've failed to notice my breath going in and out. Um, so that's really fascinating to me how so much of the embodied practices essentially come down to reminding us that we have bodies. And it's like, how could you miss that? But but we do.
Yeah, I think that noticing it's so important. It's so easy and yet it's so missed. And I feel that way about a lot of things. I've been mediating conflicts for people, and it seems so obvious what I'm doing. You know, why aren't people just doing this in their conflicts? And as a mediator, I support that, but even as a mediator, I fail to do those things in some of my own conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh yeah, it does take that extra level of awareness and practice. And I think that's why you and I have jobs, is though it is, I actually like this saying, one of my teachers, he says it's simple, but it's not easy. You
Mm-hmm.
know, if you want to be healthy, super simple. Spend time outside, eat a whole foods diet, move your body in diverse various ways, have a community. Simple,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you're like, fuck, this is not easy. I don't even have access to food, movement. What kind of movement do I do? Uh, I have conflict with the people in my community. I don't even want to see them. And then, yeah, and then how do I push away the world so that I can come into my body?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas that was and I appreciate John doing this history from, and Rafe has done this as well, is basically from the Olive Grove gathering came the gymnasia, and from the gymnasia came the academy, And from academy came science, and from science came, you know, computers and AI, and we're moving further and further from the body on this timeline. And so it's no wonder it's not as valued, that awareness, and I don't know how that happened, but that's why this return to embodiment seems so radical, or it's so popular. It's so, oh, you need to be embodied. Are you embodied? Have you heard about this thing called embodiment? And for I think for people like us, well, I mean, I was an IT technician, so I was very disembodied. I was very much in my screen, and I often forget, because at this point it's a no duh for
Mhm.
me, but I have to pause and go back and be in the newness and in the beginner's mind with the people, and recognize that, oh, this is hard. And I, even as someone who's practiced and a teacher in it, I often fail, more than I succeed. And so, yeah, I just want to give permission to people that are listening to this. It's totally okay. It's hard, it's simple, it is not at all easy, but it is important.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's also really needs to be spoken to. And I think that noticing, especially when done with other people, it makes it more real.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I'm noticing this thing. Someone says, oh, I'm noticing this thing too, or I noticed that about you. And then now you're tracking.
Mhm.
And the more that you can track these patterns through time, and I'm imagining this is some of your work, oh, this is that thing again. It's showing up. It's a little bit softer. It's a little bit dimmed
Mm.
now.
Mm.
I don't throw myself on the ground to pick up the fork. I pause and I notice. And I go,
Right.
you
Right.
silly little fork.
Mm. Well, as I talk to you, what I notice I get really interested in is this longer sense of rhythm. Because we could talk about a lot of practices that you do, but it occurs to me that maybe the biggest thing was like you used to be an IT guy. Like, how did you, right? And I've heard you tell the story a little bit, but I mean, if we just put it in a nutshell, it's like you made the decision to radically reorganize your life. And that's not something that everyone feels access to. I mean, so I outside the window behind me, there is a 6-lane road, right? It's not uncommon because there's also a fire station out here for fire engines going by all the time, including at 2 in the morning. I might have I don't know. I mean, emergencies are emergencies, but sometimes I don't know why they run the sirens at 2 in the morning because it's like no one else on the road. But for me, like I'm listening to you, and you're like, yeah, I slept last night. I think you said next to a lake or something like this, and like I can just imagine the rhythm and the sense. But you've created that situation for yourself in your life. I've chosen a life that's um, organized around movement. But I'm also still very aware that I'm a fourth-story apartment dweller. And just to get outside, I have to go down 4 flights. And there are days that I don't leave this apartment. Not proud of saying that, but that's definitely happened. I think probably accelerated with the pandemic and created certain habits. But I also not in danger of you know, starvation, because I've got a refrigerator. I mean, like, it's like it is possible to be disembodied in a way. And so to do what you've done, or even what I do, to a lot of people might seem like, well, how am I going to pull that off in the first place? I mean, if you think of yourself in the IT job again, um, I don't know if that brings an embodied kind of memory for you, but like, I just look at my day, and it's very much like, oh, I have, 15 minutes until that Zoom call. And then when the Zoom call happens, I've got a half hour between that and this other thing. And, I guess I can make a snack. And it's like, the day is laid out, and I don't think I'm saying anything that surprises anyone, but it's just that structure of our lives already is tilted away from the thing we're talking about, of really feeling, really noticing. Um, because I think the other fundamental thing you have to do in whatever form you're working with is slowing down. But there's just this sense of like, I don't have time to slow down.
Yeah. And well, it's interesting because we do, because the fact that we scheduled all those other things means we could schedule time to slow down. And it's both a gift and it's also, oh, there's a big truck coming by. Um,
Well, illustrates our point for us.
it's this gift and it's this challenge because it's a practice. And I think if as long as we can keep it in the frame of a practice, it means that it's okay that you're not good at it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that everything you are good at, you practiced. And to continue to keep that framework going. And what I even did, we have technologic, like I have a watch and I have a watch with 12 vibrating alarms on it. And I randomly set them. And one of my teachers gave me he first gave me the task to drop into the sacred silence and check in on the baseline throughout the day. Could be my baseline, could be the baseline of a place that I'm in, could be the greater baseline of my area. And so I got this watch. It has 12 vibrating alarms on it. And when it goes off, I stop.
Mm-hmm.
And I found it was so hard to stop. I'm in the middle of a workday and I'm supposed to stop for 3 minutes. Are you kidding me? It was so hard, even for me, in the things that I'm doing. So I just want to acknowledge that for people. But as you build that muscle through practices like you're doing, like I'm doing, a yoga practice, a movement practice, a mindfulness practice, all these different practices we have, the aim is to bring it into your life. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that people miss. When they do yoga, they go to yoga and it all happens within the room. And once they roll up their mat, they almost roll up that mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's been the really important thing of the dialogical practices, because in yoga you don't talk about it. They tell you to notice all these things, but they stay in your brain, and if you don't verbalize them, they don't become real, they don't become important. Nobody can check in on you later.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not to in nature or not in nature or at practice or not at practice. It's to make sure that the practice makes us better at the thing that we want to do, which is to be an embodied, aware, compassionate, cultivated, virtuous human. And we can do that in all moments, inside, outside, in our own, like, I dropped the fork. Here's a moment to practice a virtue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think, and to come back to that idea of falling in love with being or falling in love with life, that's kind of how I define it, is that life becomes a practice, but then we have to also soften the word practice, which has negative connotations for a lot of us, like, oh, I got to practice. But um, what you were just saying, the opportunity to be a beginner or to not think you're very good at it. I mean, the body and movement is an endless field for that. So like if I watch Rafe on one of those videos, for Evolve Move Play, and I see him doing flips through the trees and stuff, it's easy for me to think, wow, he's so much, more capable than me. But I bet when he's running and looking at where he's like gonna go next. Like he's seeing all kinds of things like, oh, I'm not going to try that. I'm not going to, that would be too much. Like he's on his own edge, right? I imagine. But the point is just when we go into the body and try to explore movement, there's an endless amount of let's call it we are endlessly ignorant. There's always another thing that we don't know how to do. So for me, to fall in love with life is actually to come to the place where um, I've been thinking about. John uses this phrase of combinatorial explosiveness. It's like there's so many things you could pay attention to. You've got all of your memories and associations. There's all, but you can't deal with all of it in each moment. It's too much. You could think of it as too much, like it's overwhelming. But the combinatorial explosive nature of our lives could also be looked at as like this endless like treasure trove, right? There's always something else there. There's always something to learn. There's always something to practice where you can get to the point of actually you do drop the fork on the ground. You actually do. It becomes kind of like one of those vibrations on your watch. It's like, oh, this is a reminder to notice, and so other things start reminding me, like I don't know, I'm driving and like someone cuts me off and like I just start to contract. But over the years, it's like, oh, I'm contracting. Can I release that contraction? I don't like they cut me off. They're kind of a jerk, but it's not the end of the world. No one died. Can I just let that go? Um, Rather than I'm gonna steam about it for the next hour and then I'm gonna tell my, partner when I get home about the person who cut me off in traffic. And it's like gonna just ride it all day long.
Yeah, hearing that this insight that's coming up is almost it's a reclaiming of your attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
And and that really strikes me knowing that our attention is being captured, pulled in all these moments. And it's really easy, when we're scrolling that our attention goes there. And when we drop the fork and our attention goes to the fork, those are all moments to bring our attention back to ourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the phrase or the idea that's coming up for me is when I have attention on myself, I'm in control. Which, yeah, as soon as my attention is outside of myself, I'm almost not in control in a way. And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's the looking out and looking in, and maybe I'm trying to do the both where I'm trying to hold that, especially that's why contact improv and dance is really holding. Oh, I'm noticing. Oh, I really want to do that thing. Okay, I'm listening. I've been listening this whole time, but maybe I can speak. And so yeah, that's something I want to carry with me on these next few days is, yeah, where is my attention? What do I gain when I bring my attention to myself
Mm-hmm.
for a moment, for a long moment? Um, and I think that's probably what meditation is doing in some sense. You're trying to bring the attention to yourself, and then a thought pulls it, and you're trying to bring it back. Um, but I think of that just in marketing and all these other ways, how our attention, we're in a world where our attention is being so pulled away from us that we forgot how to live in the basically the right side of the brain, to live in the sacred silence. And then, that's what grandfather talked about. He lived in the sacred silence, and then he could give his attention very strategically to things. And we're almost so far on the other side where our attention is always going out to things, and we are strategically trying to come back into ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think attention, it's good to put our attention on attention, which is another thing that, again, I don't really feel satisfied with this word embodiment. Like I use it all the time because it's like the word that other people would use to describe what I do. But one of the most crucial things I find myself saying it all the time when I'm teaching is, yeah, you can move your arms, you can move your legs, but you can move your attention. And to really notice, where is your attention? Is your attention where it most optimally should be for what you're trying to do right now? Do you know how to move your attention? How narrow is your attention, or how wide is your attention? How flexible is your attention? And you can start noticing. Um, well, you can start noticing you're noticing, right? You can do that sort of
Exactly.
zooming out, and you can begin to work with it. Um, I want to just briefly describe one of the things I do that is a little closer to what you do because it's in the park. so, um, which is I have a workshop called the musicality of being. And essentially, what we do is we go to the park, and first of all, I typically prime people with I have something I call the presence mantra. And this is my anytime, anywhere practice. And it's just noticing 5 relationships, uh, which are always present. So our breathing, we're always breathing. The ground, we're always relating to the ground or some surface. And we're always in space. You know, there's a big space, or there's a small space, or there's more space on one side and less on the other, but there's space. We're in a space. We're always surrounded and participating in a field of sound, and we're always participating and embedded in a field of light or color, shape, you know. Um, and of course, we could think of other things that are ongoing, always present, but those are the 5 that I kind of came up with and started working with. Um, and when you're in nature, all of those are rich experiences. So I think what I want to get to is because I think you can maybe speak to it even more than I could, but is something about nature in particular. Like you already talked about, if I'm just sitting, you know, let's say I'm meditating, but I'm here versus where you are. It's just like it's a different baseline, right? But at the musicality being workshops, so we sort of I just invite people to notice all of these things, and we spend a few minutes, right? Like with ground, do you have more weight over your left leg, or do you have more weight over your right leg? If you shift to your right leg, is that more comfortable for you or less comfortable for you? Because we have our patterns in our bodies and those kinds of things. But then we basically we have partners, and we walk down the trail with partners, you know, and it's a beautiful place. There's birds, there's trees, there's wind, you know, there's other people on the trail, sometimes with their dogs, but we're doing dialogical practices with our partner while we're walking. And it's typically something along the lines of essentially, what are you noticing right now? I often ask people to either say, I notice this in my body or in the world around me. And so we bounce between body, world, present moment. If I'm walking with you and you notice something about, you know, the color of the leaves in the tree, like I can't help but now notice it myself because you just said it. So what we're doing is we're walking down the trail and talking, but what we're also doing is we're pinging our attention, you know, and so our attention goes like this, and we're relating, right? So I also tell people, well, every time you speak, you make a sound, and then every time you stop speaking, you make a silence, and that's rhythm. And when you stop speaking, you might hear a bird call, right? And then when your partner finishes speaking and it's your turn, you might speak right away, or you might walk 10 paces because that's what feels right. And so what we start to listen to is myself, my partner, and so it's like 3 levels of attention. And we still have to, you know, deal with each moment. So our attention might zoom in different ways, but we're trying to kind of hold the inner, the outer, and the relational all together. And that's kind of how that works. Um, we do a meditation halfway through the walk because we find ourselves next to a creek, and there's something about the movement of water, right? And that's also just an opportunity to stop talking to my partner, for 10 minutes, and we all just go into that place, and then we come back out. And then when we basically walk a big loop, we end where we start, so that when it's time to go, people can get back in their cars or whatever. But when we get to that end point and we've spent 3 hours relating inner, outer, you, me, environment, bodies, words, wordlessness, and just kind of mixing all of that, there's something that now is happening that it's not like the start of the workshop where we need the instructions and we need the procedures and the practices. We're just in a different state where at this point now we're sitting in the group and doing final shares, and a car goes by and everyone just pauses because it makes a sound, and then it goes, and then the conversation begins again, and then some kid on the grass over here laughs and everyone sort of turns and sees it and smiles at each other, and then the conversation goes on. But it's like there's this that you get this sense of like things are fitting with each other. So yeah, anyway, as a description of the workshop, I just thought I'd drop it in. But
Make sure you guys sign up. It sounds amazing.
that's right.
And it's again there's the simplicity in what you're doing, but the ease in which one would do that is not there typically. I mean, so many people comment, I can't believe you're charging people to go play in nature. I'm like, cool, go play in nature on your own. It's totally fine with me. I wish that was the way of the world. Um,
Right. Right.
but it's not how I got involved in nature. It's not how most people get involved in these practices. Is it's really and it's hard to learn on your own. It's hard to do on your own. A lot of people are just coming to meet other people because they both resonate with the message that you're speaking to, and they're maybe they just want to, that's the only way to find other people, because it's you can't just walk up to some weirdo at the park who's looking at the birds. But I think what you're doing is you're building relationships through the noticing, and those are real relationships that are embedded in a real world. You don't have to search for something to talk about. You're talking about what's happening around you. And it brings presence and connection and trust. There's not this need to impress somebody, with your job or your whatever it is you are striving to try to find things to talk about. Um, you know, we I used to work where we would run these tracking week-long tracking experiences, and the presence, the awareness, the connection that happens when you're just talking about the marks on the ground. And then at the end of the day, we gather around the fire and we tell stories about our day. And the whole day becomes about the day. And the moments become the moments. And that level of presence and attention is so connective and freeing. There's there's nothing there's nothing that you need to do other than offer your attention and share it. And then when you share it and people listen, you feel valued, you feel seen, you feel that you have something to contribute. You notice something that maybe somebody else didn't notice. And when those noticings come together, you have a more real conglomerate picture of the world. And the more real the world is to you, the more meaningful it becomes. And when you value those stories, especially, the end shares they're almost the most important part. It's where people listen and they value the experience that you just had.
Right. Right.
And all you did, you were just the most human you could be. You were out in a beautiful place, noticing the world around you and sharing those noticings with others. And that in itself is a gift to the people in the group. And then your witness offering that gift and all of a sudden that kind of agapic love and connection is swirling in the group. And yeah, it's always mind boggling every time. I mean, maybe you have the experience too. You just do these things that seem so simple and they're so impactful. They're so powerful. The kind of testimonial, the reflections at the end are so rich that I often, having gone from IT to living in the woods, I forget about that sometimes.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, what's happening for me is like you use that phrase, like you become more human. And I think that that's what's always drawn me into these practices. Like, so, terms of the sort of main practice I do that kind of everything else is flowed from, it's the Feldenkrais method, which maybe another time we could, I mean, just you can go on and on about the Feldenkrais method. It's
I mean,
unusual.
that's what we're talking about. We're just talking about
Yeah,
noticing movement.
right. I mean, well, actually, that's great because that's the Feldenkrais method is just about noticing your movement. That's a great, like really simple. You just move and you notice it. So, okay, so that's the Feldenkrais method. But I discovered the Feldenkrais method, um, you know, basically online, but I was in a place where I was constantly searching on Google for different things, different practices, because I was at a place in life where things sucked in a lot of ways, where I was at in my marriage and, you know, prospects in a career, social networks, all of those things were really in a I was in a bad place, and there was no clear idea like how do I get a bunch of friends again? How do I fix this marriage that seems right? And so the only thing that made sense, and I really kind of like thought it was a little thing, was I was just like, well, I guess I could try to become more healthy. And so I started running every day, you know, and then from there I had heard of yoga and I didn't even know what the word was. Like it could have been like, I don't know, something that doesn't look like yoga at all. But I didn't even have an image in my head of what yoga was. I just knew it was this weird thing. But you know, I started looking for those things. But the point is like, so I started doing things like moving and noticing how I move, but I was also putting my life together. And the thing is, it's interesting. I mean, if I go back further in my story, I just had a very kind of middle class upbringing, and I'd like to say like we never went camping, we never did that. Like I had none of that. And then later, as I became involved in got involved in political activism, different things, and I was working in factories for a while. And I had the most incredible experience of my own value in the factory because I was picking stuff up and I was carrying it and I was putting it down over there and I was, you know, cutting pounds of meats and like the orders were finished. And it was like, but it was all like, you know, in my upbringing, you know, the work I was now doing in the factory was like something that I'd always thought earlier in life that's to be avoided. And use the word about being impressive, like that, is that impressive, you know? But it's really stressful if you don't have access to feeling useful in an embodied way, and you have to be smart and you have to have a resume that's got everything on it, and you have to like all of that stuff. And some people know how to do it and they put together the really sweet resume and they get the nice job and they buy the nice car and they do that in life. um, but I think there's something really missing. But I don't know. There's just a lot of different things coming together for me, and I realize they're kind of going in different directions. But for me, this has really been a lifeline. You know, the kind of work we're doing, and yeah,
Well, I think the the little thing I think is a really important. It's often the small thing that changes that usefulness that you experience at the factory. The I'm gonna get healthy. I don't know what that looks like, but I'm gonna go down that road. And same for me. I went to a little like 2 day survival course. I was like, I've been watching, Man versus Wild and Survivor and all these shows, and hey, I'm gonna try that out. And then I made my first bow drill fire and I blew this tinder bundle into flames. And I thought, holy crap, I am an infinite well of potential.
Mm-hmm.
And that seed is what has propelled me in and on this journey, and planting that seed and awakening that seed in others.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear that's what you're doing as well. And there was a quote. I took this marketing class, and the quote was something like your trauma or your wound is the doorway to your niche. Um, that thing that you were searching for so badly in those moments of crises, you have found and are now offering that to others.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important to recognize, um, just in the value that we have to offer. Sometimes we're like, oh, it's so simple, just notice your body and notice the things around you. But it can be that turning point, that noticing that little moment can propel people on just the transformative journey of connection and change.
Yeah, well, and I'm sure you can recognize this too. Like, so simple, notice your body. But I run into people all the time and say, it's really hard for me to notice my body. And I actually have to try to remember what that's like or imagine what that's like because
Mm.
like I do a lot of practices, but again, I feel like, and I'm not living in nirvana or anything, but I definitely like when it's time to meditate, I'm always like, gonna meditate. This is gonna be awesome, like because I just know there's a well of experience and discovery that's just waiting there for me. Um, but I did wanted to get you to say maybe a little more about this piece. You said when you blew this and you created the fire. I can't even describe it because now we're in a place where I'm sitting here going, I don't know how to do that, but I'm kind of like drawn towards it. But you experienced yourself as an infinite well of potential, and you think if everyone was walking around experiencing themselves that way, um, how different would that be? And of course, you know, you can go watch as many podcasts as you want on how incredible human beings are and what we are capable of, but of course we're in this time period where it's kind of like, gosh, with all we're capable of, look at this mess we've made. And so the thing is, I can also imagine someone watching one of those shows like Man versus Wild and just being like, that was crazy. Did you see what those guys were doing in the woods? That was really entertaining. And like, now I'm going to turn the show off and like go back. Like they don't go to the place where you went. Where like, I want to know what that's like. And they don't, the thing about I experience myself as this infinite potential. That's, that's so different than I experience myself receiving a large paycheck. But the large paycheck really functionally does something for a person. So how like I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but how do we actually, because this seems to be like that slower movement of attention, like from living as a IT tech to deciding to basically live in the woods. Like how, because there's something we have to leave behind, right? There's something that we have to give up to go more into these kinds of experiences. What would you say about, I don't know, helping people to see the value or see the why it's worthwhile to actually go on that kind of a journey?
Yeah, I mean, I'll make it a little simpler than that. your attention is so valued. It's your most valued resource. People pay bajillions of dollars for 1 second of your attention. If you're watching this, I am so grateful that you have brought your attention into this moment. And when you imbue the world with your attention, you bring it to life. The bird is almost not real until you give it your attention. And when you give it your attention, you enchant and imbue the world with life. And then through that is the opportunity for connection. And once you become connected to something, it becomes meaningful to you. And you are more likely to protect and save the things that are meaningful to you than those that are not. And that is why millions of acres of old growth are being cut down because people are not connected to it. And you know, where a bunch of my friends, they had an old growth forest that was meaningful to them, and they put up blockades, and they sacrificed tons of time and energy to do that. And so I think like that's the place that I would start is being connected to that park. If someone was going to come in and tear down that park and put up a high rise, I would hope that you and all of the people that are connected to that park would be upset and would stop that from happening. And so that's one piece is just whether you're in the city or the wild, there's nature everywhere. There's opportunities to connect and offer your intention in a way that brings you into that potential. It's the noticing. We call it the east. It's I have to notice that there is potential. And then I kind of move into the southeast of orientation of like, okay, well, I got to sign up for this class, or I liked what he said. I'm going to go to this workshop. And then there's the actual work of experiencing and living in the potential. And and in IT, I felt useless without a computer, an internet, and electricity. And when I made that fire, I realized that with attention and relationship and energy, I am so capable that I can bring forth fire. Like, I can burn down this whole forest. I can cook my food. I can boil water. Like, I can do all these things. And so that's the encouragement for people is to just, there's edible plants all around you. There's animals moving all around you. All of these skills of connecting with nature, they expand your potential. Like if you know how to track animals, you can track trends in marketing. You can track trends in your body. You can track trends in your body. You can track animals. So these skills are not one dimensional. They've gone down a particular pathway and have been divorced from their evolutionary purpose. And as we connect into that, I believe we find ourselves more full of life, more energy, therefore more capable.
Yeah, I love that. That was really that was really clear. The bird isn't real if I'm if I'm not giving it my attention, and then attention makes connection, and connection makes, meaning. I love that. Um, I know that we're more or less at the end of the time that you had, so I'm also thinking of like another 20 things to talk to you about.
Oh my God, there's so many. I'm finally getting lit up.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's something I appreciate, is that lit upness in you, which I've been feeling, and I think that's also the part of me that's feeling like, oh, we could keep going here. That's that sense of infinite potential, right? That there's just, um, I don't know. I suppose you could take two people in a totally different field who just have enough overlap, like you and I, and they would feel that too. But oops.
Oh no, I lost you.
Hey, you're back. That was funny. I was like, I just kept talking, even though you weren't there. But I was like, God, that was an embodied experience, right? I was feeling the grief and the loss and all. Now I was just saying, and now that we're connected again, yeah, what I feel in this connection. I was saying, maybe two people who do totally different things than you and I, just having a shared interest would have a kind of a similar thing. But there, this is a connection that's meaningful, right? Even though we've just met. And also when you're talking, I see you using your body. I hear the aliveness in your voice. I hear, it's just you're very I think anyone listening will get a sense of your embodiment, right? And I can say that to maybe pay you a compliment, but also just to say that, like, when we're embodied, it resonates beyond us. When you said we track trends in marketing the way we track our body, it's like, yeah, because our bodies live in a world with markets. Like, they're not totally disconnected. Anyway, I'm a little discombobulated from you going away and coming back while I was just talking about all this. But I'm excited, and I hope we'll do more of it. Anything you want to say here at the end, just as we're wrapping up?
Yeah, I just really appreciate your perspective, and I'm walking away with new insights. And that's what I really appreciate about these dialogues is I'm thinking about things differently and newly and looking at the same thing from this other perspective, and I'm really excited about that to see what gold and fruit will blossom from that moment. Yeah, so I'm really grateful for that, and I'm just really happy about the work that you're doing in the world. I really haven't experienced it from propositionally. I really am interested and curious, and I think there's a lot of alignment, and I love the language that you use. So, yeah, I'm just appreciating that. So, thanks for taking the time.
Well, we'll have to do it again.